Hi, I'm Andy, and this is my lesson on how to use the substring method in Java. In this lesson, I'll show you how to use two different versions of this method to extract parts of a string. Let's get started. We're going to start by looking at a very common programming task, parsing a string. Parsing a string means processing a string in order to extract useful information from it. In our example, we're given this string, and we want to parse out the substrings between the commas, meaning we want to get these two substrings and store them as their own two string objects. To do that, we'll use the string class's substring method. Here's the general syntax for that method. Notice this method has two parameters, a starting index and an ending index. The substring method returns a string containing all the characters from starting index up to, but not including, ending index. This can be confusing for new Java programmers. The string returned by substring includes the character at this index, but does not include the character at this index. It only includes the characters up to that index. Okay, so let's use the substring method to get the first flavor in the flavors string. To help us out, here's a nice visual showing all the characters and flavors and their index locations. We want to first grab this substring. Notice it includes the characters from index 0 through index 4. That means we need to put 0 as our starting index and 5 as our ending index in our substring call. Let's print out our first flavor just to make sure that our substring method worked correctly. So it did work correctly, but that doesn't mean we have necessarily written good code. Here's what I mean. Suppose in the future our flavors string changes. That would mean we would also have to change this line of code, specifically this parameter, since the ending index for our first flavor would also probably change. In other words, our code is very inflexible because we hard-coded the 5 here. It stops working correctly if flavors is ever changed. To fix this, notice the ending index for our first flavor string coincides with the location of the comma in the flavors string. So instead of hard-coding a 5 as our ending index, we can use the index of string method and have our program figure out dynamically what the ending index should be. Think about why this line of code is so much better. No matter what we change our flavor string to, as long as it still follows this comma-separated format, this line of code will still work correctly. Okay, now let's get this flavor from the flavors string. Notice we want to get the substring containing all the characters from the index 6 to the end of the string. This substring method call would do the trick. The starting index is here, one spot greater than the commas index. And the length method returns 12, which is indeed our ending index for the substring method. Let's check it. Good, it worked. This is a good line of code. It works, and since there's no numbers hard-coded as parameters, it will continue working even if we change the flavors string. But it is a bit complicated. We can simplify it a bit by recognizing that the substring method is overloaded in the string class. There are multiple versions of it. The general syntax for the version we'll use here looks like this. To use this version, you pass one parameter, the starting index for your desired substring. The method then returns a string object containing all the characters from that index to the end of the string. This is exactly what we want. So let's use this version because it results in a line of code that is simpler and easier to understand than our original. We'll test our code again and make sure both flavors are still parsed out of the flavors string correctly. Okay, so that's the basics of how to use substring. Before we go, let me show you just a few more things. Look at this code and try to figure out what will happen when we run it. Okay, let's give it a try. So we got a string index out of bounds exception. That's because our string looks like this. And we told substring to grab the characters from these indexes, one of which is clearly out of bounds. Anytime you see a string index out of bounds exception, it means you told the method to grab a character from an index that doesn't actually exist. Now look at this code and predict the output. To understand why the dog string is still dog after the substring method, you need to remember string objects are immutable. Their data cannot change in any way. So when you invoke the substring method on a string object, that method creates a new string object, this one containing the characters specified in the substring parameters. The method then returns the address to that new string object. In this case, we don't have an assignment operator, so that address is simply discarded. And that newly created string object will soon be discarded as well when it gets garbage collected. That means this line of code is basically pointless. Okay, let's make a small change and see what happens. So it looks like the dog string did change here. It was dog, and now it's just D. Does this violate my claim that strings are immutable? No, it does not. To see why, let's explore this code in some depth. When this line of code executes, our dog string object is created, and its address is stored in a string reference called dog. Then this line executes. Remember, you should always evaluate the expression on the right of an equal sign first. This substring method creates a brand new string object containing the characters from index 0 up to but not including index 1. Then the substring method returns the address of that new object. The assignment operator stores that address in the dog reference variable. So notice, our string object did not change. It's the address stored in the reference variable that changed. In short, string objects are indeed immutable, but the address stored in their reference variables can, and often do, change. And that wraps up this lesson on the substring method in Java. I'm Andy. Thanks for watching and coding with me today.